All right, guys. I'm going to attempt to try to explain multiple time frame. It's just very hard to do with illustrations. Um, but let's have a go at it. Because very important to know this is like key. This is the magic. So for example, here we have a daily time frame, daily H4, H1, right? Which we can say that this is possibly a wick of the daily time frame. So let's consider this a wick. Okay. So when we have M1, what's our objective? It's always M15, right? When we have M15, our objective is H1, H1 is H4, H4 is daily, okay? So we understand that. And this is the same trend, right? So on here, obviously you're gonna have less pullbacks because you're on a higher time frame, less pullbacks because you're on a higher time frame, less pullbacks on a higher time frame. Now, if you're taking buys off M1, right, off a daily level, and you see, let me change the color. Shit. Okay, let's just make it yellow. Okay, so if you see buys off M1 and you get your boss, you can take that buy, right? It's just going to be a very high risk buy because you haven't had any real breakout from a higher time frame. But you can still take a buy, but you can't hold that. You're gonna have to take it to your M15, right? Because this is your M15 trend. So M15 right here would be your M15 resistance, okay, on this time frame over here. Okay. So that would probably be somewhere in this like this M15 resistance. So once you understand like, okay, from M1, I can go to M15, but it's most likely going to reject that M15. And if it does reject that M15, where's M15's level, right? It's going to be somewhere in H1. Okay. Now let's say that doesn't happen, and then we just get, a boss or whatever, and it goes to your H1 resistance. Okay. So if we get from this M1 entry and it goes to an H1 resistance, right? And then we have a break on M15 from H1, it's going to find the next H1, right? Wherever your H1 is over here. Now, if that breaks the H1, right, from F15 and you break H1, what does that mean? It means we're going to find H4, okay? So on H4, now this is very hard to explain, okay? Let me try to redo this. So on M15, let me erase this. This is confusing me. Okay, so this is your M15 resistance, and let's just say that this is your M15 resistance on the M15, obviously, right? So this is your M15 resistance, and this is your M15 resistance on M1. Okay, so when you're taking a buy here and you have a lower time frame, break of structure, right? And you want to buy that pullback. If we already tapped into the M15 and it came back, you don't want to be buying this low off M1 anymore. Okay, you don't want to be doing that because your M15 is showing you, hey, we're rejecting and we're going down. Okay, it doesn't want to go past the M15. Now, let's say price actually broke the M15 before hitting our H1, H1 over here, right? Before hitting that. So we break through and then we reach we don't reach H1 yet. You can still take any buy on M15 and 5M1 to target your H1 because you now have confirmed that you broke M15, right? The fact that we broke the M15 resistance signals that we're looking for the H1, right? Because M15 is controlling H1. So we would be looking for H1 resistance. Once that's tapped, right, we can monitor structure on what? On H1, on M15 or M5 and look for a boss, okay? And if that happens, right, naturally what's going to happen is you're going to create some level on H1, right? If we break M15, we're going to have some level on H1. And that means closing above M15, right? So for example, like if we traded to M15 and broke through it and tapped into our H1, but it just taps H1 and then rejects, and we're still on a 15-minute time frame, okay, you have to understand that your H1 hasn't closed yet. Your H1 is still not there yet, right? Now, if we're still on H1 and price closes above M15, right? We're still not inside the M15 time frame. And we go to our H1, right? We can look for cells in that H1, right? We can look for cells in that H1, targeting whatever H1 structure was left behind because we've closed H1 now, right? Once we've closed that H1 time frame, then we can look for the H1 support and resistance. But if that time frame hasn't come, that could just be a wick and come all the way back down to find new levels down here and down here. Okay, so you have to be very understanding of when your candles are closing, right? You don't want to take a buy on a QM because you're monitoring an H1 time frame. If you're monitoring an H1 time frame and price hasn't closed, but it created a QM, and then you realize like, oh shit, price is not even closed yet. It may not even be a QM that formed at that point. It might just be an entire rejection, an entire wick. So you have to be cautious of that. So coming from the daily off M1, right? And then we hit our M15 resistance, right? And if we close above that on M15, then we can look for our H1. Now we got to close above M15 on H1. After that, let's say we're here in price at that point, right? From the M1 chart, from the daily level, right? Because we're looking at this daily level. After price reaches this H1 level and rejects on M15, it's going to try to find an H1. Now, let's say that after M1, we have like an H1 level like this right here. Okay, so this yellow is H1. And we're coming from H1 to H1, right? H1 to H1. When price travels back here, what are we monitoring? M15, right? If M15 has a breakout, then we know that H1 to H1 is now complete. And once we break our new H1 resistance, whatever resistance had been created on H1 after it has closed, we know that we're safe to go to H4. Okay, H4 resistance over here. Okay, now let's say that doesn't happen and we break our H1. We break this low like that, coming from this H1 level here. Okay, so this H1 level, we know we have the M15 boss. We can look for a trade. If we miss that trade and it comes down to our H1 level, but we see no boss on M15, there's no trade there, right? We're playing off the H1 level. Now that this had broke H1, what does that mean? And closes below this H1 low, right? We have to have an H1 close below the H1. We're going to be looking for that H4, okay? We're looking for this H4. Now on H4, we can look for our H1 breakout. If we have that H1 breakout, what are we looking for? Our H4 resistance. Okay, so from this level, from our H4 to our H4. Okay, so once we're from H4 to H4, we're going to create some sort of structure on H4, right? Now we have H4 to a H4 level. Okay, now we just need to wait for the H1 boss. Then we go down to a lower time frame to, reduce whatever size we want to reduce it down to, and start taking entries there with a lot more capability of it having a longer stretch, because we understand H4 should go to H4 and H4 went to H4 here. So we should clear this because H4 to H4 story is complete. Now that the story is complete, the likelihood of us going to our daily level is a lot more probable than coming from that first time on this H1, on this M1, right? So imagine you're trying to take this H1 from here to the daily. That doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't make sense at all. because we have all those other roadblocks in between, and we have all those other timeframes that need to be completed first. So when we're trading from our M1, we should be looking at our M15, and then our M15 is giving us signals of either like, hey, price wants to go lower, or we can break that and then we can sell maybe an H1 resistance for price to come back and retest. Okay. And then from our H4, right, let's say that this doesn't respect, right? What's going to happen is we're going to come lower, right? We'll come lower either into an H1 roadblock or a different daily level or a weekly level, because if H4 breaks, right, if this price action breaks, what are we looking for? A daily level. And then now we're also having to monitor this daily to see if price action broke to find a weekly level below. I know how confusing this can be, and I'm trying my best to explain it, but it's very hard to explain it visually. It's almost like having to have a 3D mindset where you can see different dimensions of it. But once you understand how each time frame correlates with each other and it controls the other time frame, becomes easier to know when to hold the trade or when to just scalp, right? But a good rule of thumb is if you're entering off M1, you should be targeting M15 and monitoring structure on M15. Okay, what is the M15 storyline telling you? Okay, after that, then you have your H1, right? But understanding that H1, if we're breaking structure on H1, we're most likely going to find some H4 level. Okay, so H4 level, if we break structure on that, you know, we're headed to a daily level. But just understanding that, okay, once this time frame is complete, M15 to M15 is completed, so H1 should have no problem. H1 to H1 is completed, okay, so H4 should have no problem. H4 to H4 completed, then daily should have no problem, okay? And then you also need to understand what each time frame is doing, right? So let's say we have a breakout on daily like this. Okay, we have a breakout on daily, but this leg right here, this leg, okay, what does that look like on H4, right? So if we look at this leg on H4, you're thinking, oh shit, we're fucking bullish. But you're not realizing that you're just in a retracement. Okay, you have to realize that this leg is a retracement to what? To, let's say, a daily resistance. Okay, so when we understand like, okay, so H4 is retracing and looking bullish because of a daily retracement to a daily level. Okay, so we're going from H4 to daily. Now we monitor this zone here. And once we monitor this zone, right, and we find our breakout structure, okay, right, now our H4, right, this is a daily, but right here would be our H4 inside here, right? So this is looking bullish, 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 and then we break the structure, okay? So from here, we've broken the structure has changed to match the daily, right? So now we're matching daily structure. But what if I have a huge, you know, stop loss? Well, what is this on H4 if it comes back up? When H4 comes back up here, what is this on H1? This looks bullish on H1, right? So what do we have to do? We have to wait for H1 to break out. Okay, now the H1 is breaking out. We have H4 confirmed bearish. We have daily confirmed bearish. We have H1 now trading bearishly. We can go down to like an M15 and wait for a pullback. Okay, that's a lot safer position than trying to catch M1, right? You're trying to catch M1 here. Or you may even get confused and buy and not knowing why, like, hey, we have a structure, you know, break. Well, you have structure breaks on H4 to do what? To get to the daily level, right? H4 is in control of daily, so H4 is going to daily. H4 is at daily. Break of structure. Okay, what is H4 doing here, right? Is it going to find an H4 level or maybe an H1 roadblock? And what if it does trade to that roadblock? Why is it trading to this roadblock? so that it can retrace back up into the H4 resistance, right? Because now you're seeing, oh, nice, we have a roadblock here on H1, or actually this is a H4 support or H1 roadblock, whatever it is that's down here. You're monitoring the price action from here now. Okay, from here, you're looking at, okay, what's my H1 doing? My H1 is going bullish. Why? Why is my H1 going bullish? My H1 is going bullish so that it can get to the H4. Okay, so now that my H1 is bullish, going to H4, I can wait for H1 to break structure, okay, because I know now that this is my new zone to look for sells in. Okay, because we already have daily going bearish, we have H4 going bearish, bouncing off H1 roadblock or H4 support to get back up into the H4 resistance. Then we have H1 showing structure. So now I have 3 time frames lined up, and then now I have my M15 where I can just take a safe trade off this level. Okay, so now you understand H4 to H4. Does that make sense? H4 support to H4 resistance complete. Now we have H1 coming back down to whatever was created after this had traded here, right? So if this was structural breaks on H1 and we have H1 to H1, and then we have M15, right? So we have H1, let's say support here because of this coming up. So now we have H1 support going to H1 resistance complete. Take the sell from M15 or M5, whatever your time frame is at that moment. And knowing that, okay, we've completed this, where's my next zone, right? H1 already broke structure. We're just retracing, enter. So that means I need to find my next H4 down here somewhere. H4 doesn't respect, and I find my daily. Okay, so that's how you use the multiple time frames, and just keep practicing and studying that and paying attention to when these candles close. I'll make more videos on this because I know it's going to be confusing the first time.